spared execution, but spent the rest of his life under house arrest. You will be pleased to hear that he was pardoned by the Catholic Church in 1992. Through the 350 years that Galileo remained a convicted heretic, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto continued to orbit Jupiter, as they do to this day. And today we know them collectively as the Galilean moons. Societies ruled by fear, in which free inquiry is suppressed, questioning forbidden, and heresy persecuted, were the norm in Galileo's time. They are far from unknown in our own time. For the fact that we do not live in such a society now, we owe much to the Enlightenment, to the early Americans, many of them Unitarians, who drank deeply from its wells. The Enlightenment, in 20 words or less, was an intellectual movement that began in the 1600s and championed reason and individualism over tradition and religious authority. If you grew up asking difficult questions in a religious culture that did not always welcome difficult questions, the Enlightenment philosophers are your people. They argued that asking difficult questions was exactly what everyone should be doing. And if you've always enjoyed speaking your mind, and maybe even enjoyed ruffling a few feathers, it's not surprising that you found your way to Unitarian Universalism, a religious tradition that exemplifies the Enlightenment values of reason, debate, and the equality of all humanity. It's my hope this morning to start a conversation about those values and our present relationship to them, to explore some areas where they're fraying, under pressure, or maybe have been abandoned altogether. And while it is not difficult to find examples of Enlightenment principles in retreat in Red America, I'm just as focused on looking at the blue America where many of us dwell in body, mind, or spirit. Scrutinizing ourselves rather than our neighbors strikes me as both more challenging and more useful. As the great scientist Richard Feynman said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Like a solid three-legged stool, we can think of an enlightened perspective as resting on the three values I mentioned: reason, debate, equality. And the first pillar is reason. In place of superstition, dogma, Enlightenment thinkers centered observable evidence, experience, and Unitarians were fully on board. From William Ellery Channing to Reverend James and Reverend Carey, our religious tradition has emphasized rationality and the importance of individual conscience. These radical sentiments are at the core of our faith. Of course, everyone believes that they're committed to knowledge and reason. The test comes when facts collide with our expectations or our hopes or our beliefs. House Speaker Mike Johnson illustrated this for me recently when he claimed that illegals were voting. Pressed by a reporter, he acknowledged that he had no evidence of this, but added, "We all know it intuitively." This response would earn poor scores from a panel of Enlightenment-era-style judges. People committed to reason follow the evidence, even when it leads them to a conclusion that surprises or disappoints them. New evidence causes them to re-examine their beliefs. Unenlightened thinkers find it easier to reject reality rather than interrogate their beliefs. Consider this line from George Orwell's novel 1984. "In the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make that claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it. I've spent much of the past 8 years pinballing between anger, grief, and incredulity as millions of my fellow Americans have seemingly fallen for lies just as audacious. On June 27th of this year, President Biden debated former President Trump. My spouse was too nervous to watch the debate live, so I sat in the living room alone as he paced in the kitchen. Just 2 days before, a Trump-supporting relative of mine had warned me that Biden's age had caught up to him. I shot back that she believed everything she saw on Fox News. Now, mouth agape at Biden's poor performance, I realize that with respect to at least one significant issue, I was the one who was misinformed. I was the one who had walled myself off from information I did not want to hear. I was the one who had allowed my politics to determine how I interpreted the evidence of Biden's advancing age. Be skeptical of all empirical claims, political psychologist Philip Tetlock cautions us, but especially skeptical of those that make your community of co-believers feel good about themselves. In fairness to myself, my chosen news sources share much of the blame here. I hesitate to nerd brag in such auspicious company, but I consider myself relatively well-informed about national politics. I subscribe to the Washington Post, to the New York Times, and perhaps like some of you, I listen to NPR regularly. The fact that I was caught completely off guard by the president's diminishment does not reflect well on those institutions. To be honest, I feel that my subscriptions should be refunded. The journalists who I pay and trust to sniff out the truth and keep me informed of the facts, whatever they may be, whether I like them or they like them, did not do that. In contrast, Democrats' collective willingness to accept external reality in the days after that debate and to re-examine their conclusions about who should serve as the party's nominee, that demonstrated a heartening allegiance to reason and empiricism. That allegiance allowed Democrats to make a clear-eyed decision, an encouraging sign that at least one of America's 2 major parties remains intellectually functional. But the biased, obfuscating reporting of my chosen news sources, the paper of record, and my own inclination to write off accurate warnings as conservative propaganda, that remains a stark reminder of another one of Orwell's insights. To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. The second pillar of enlightened thinking is open debate. Philosophers like Voltaire famously defended everyone's right to speak their mind. I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it, is essential to human progress. Even the expression of false ideas is beneficial because it forces true ideas to be rigorously defended and refined. And so our courts and our medical journals alike operate on the principle that it is through the clash of opposing viewpoints that the most valid conclusions will emerge. Our scientific community thrives on the adversarial review process, where peer review and critical evaluation of theories ensure that only the most robust ideas stand. They say that in the years that he spent studying the evidence of natural selection, Charles Darwin forced himself, whenever he came across a fact that was inconvenient for his thesis, to write it down, to take it seriously, to pay attention to it. His book, The Origin of the Species, that emerged from this process, was uniquely persuasive because it anticipated and answered the strongest objections to his theory of evolution. In any democratic institution, the U.S. Senate or a fellowship like UUFR, respectful disagreement is one sign of an intellectual culture that is robust. By engaging me in dialogue, you demonstrate respect for my judgment, my ability to reason. Rather than condemning or threatening me, you focus on educating me, persuading me. And on many questions, reasonable people can disagree. The wooden wall behind me is a good example of that. Many of you lived through it, some merely know the legend, but the battle over whether this wall should be installed was hard fought and hard felt. Some loved the way that the wall framed the chancel. Others hated the way that the wall obscured the window. Ultimately, reasonable people can disagree. So we voted, put up the wall, and kept moving. There are questions to which there is only one right answer, but perhaps not so many as we hold dear. We can have many opinions, but we don't have to believe all of them. Free speech and open debate are nearly always under intense pressure, and our time is no different. One example on my mind these days is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attempts to silence his critics by categorizing opposition to his policies as anti-Semitism. Hatred and suspicion based on a person's Jewish identity is wrong. But the meaning of anti-Semitism does not reasonably stretch to encompass any opposition to policies of the current Israeli government. And calling people anti-Semitic for questioning the policies of that government chills free speech and shuts down open debate. Equally concerning is the conviction of so many progressives, particularly students, that disrupting or silencing speakers with whom they disagree is their right and perhaps their responsibility. In March of last year, 2023, a U.S. Circuit Court judge, Kyle Duncan, who sits on the conservative Fifth Circuit, was invited by a student group to speak at Stanford Law School. His speech was disrupted by a group of liberal law students protesting his rulings, particularly on issues related to LGBTQ rights and abortion. I suspect that many of us would side with the students substantively. With hundreds of students chanting and heckling, Judge Duncan was unable to deliver his remarks and was escorted out the back door of Stanford Law School by federal marshals. It is air only and not truth that shrinks from inquiry. It is air only and not truth that shrinks from inquiry. Thomas Paine said that. In both red and blue America, it is good to remind ourselves and our children that we can tolerate exposure to views that we do not like, that we can defend our ideas on their merits, and that engaging in open debate is the right and responsibility of every citizen in a democracy. The third and final pillar of the Enlightenment is the equality of all humanity. In the European world, in which only certain voices, those of men born to noble families, mattered, philosophers such as John Stuart Mill argued that all voices should be heard and all ideas evaluated based on their truth and utility, not the social status or the identity of the speaker. A society in which people are silenced because of their class, race, gender, or any other inherent characteristic is a society impoverished. Look at Afghanistan, where literally the religious government has banned the sound of women's voices in public. No talking, no reading, no recitation. Your heart breaks for every woman with the ill fate to suffer under that brutal regime. But our hearts must break again for the nation itself. How can it rise from violence and poverty with half of its population bound and gagged? The history of our world is replete with examples of people whose ideas were discounted by their identity or would have been had they not concealed it, and not just in our country. Ibn Sina, a Persian polymath and physician of the Islamic Golden Age, obscuring his Shia background to advance in the predominantly Sunni political environment of the time. Or Jagjivan Ram, a key figure in the Indian independence movement, hiding his Dalit background in order to be evaluated at the university on merit alone. Or the Bronte sisters, publishing Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights under male pseudonyms as the Bell brothers. Through the struggles for abolition, for suffrage, for marriage, our faith tradition has stood with those whose voices have been shut out. It is work that is still ongoing. But we don't have to look any further than Mark Robinson or Michelle Morrow to know that neither race nor gender is a proxy for virtue. Social class has never determined character, one way or the other, and no sect, race, caste, or identity has a monopoly on wisdom. As Unitarian Universalists, our continued calling is to see ever more fully the inherent value of every human being. Our current times are not easy times for truth, not easy times for reason, but perhaps no time has ever been. I am grateful to live in a nation where female voices are not outlawed. I am grateful to be a member of a religious community where everyone is allowed to ask hard questions. And I'm grateful to know so many people who want to have real conversations about ideas, to look through the telescope open to seeing new truths. If bright new moons drift across the skies, may we have the eyes to see them. Amen. And now, will you please stand as you are able for our closing hymn? It's number 346. Come sing a song with me. Hey.
Come sing a song with winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time.
As we end this time of worship together, may we do so with ever more love for one another, with ever more gratitude for the precious gift of life that we share this very day, with ever more peace in our hearts, and with ever more hope for our own lives and the world we share. So may it be.